My name is Calibra Jacobs Reed. I'm a veteran teacher of 22 years and a wife and mom of two autistic sons who attend public school right here in Broward County. Today, I'm here with my fellow PIP advocates, Darlene, Dawn, Erica, Kalisha, and Patricia, to talk to you about our proposal to add disability education as a mandate to the Florida curriculum. Let's start off with a few seconds to reflect about what each one of us knows about the disability community. When I sat down to write this speech, I gave myself 30 seconds to name 5 people with disabilities who have positively impacted our American society. Easy, right? Well, I wasn't able to do it in 30 seconds, not even a minute. Me, the mom of 2 disabled kids with a master's degree, an educator, I couldn't do it. My friends here, they couldn't do it either. It's not easy. You see, it's not easy because none of us have been formally educated about disabilities. And that's why we're here today. It's about strengthening the foundation of our community through our education system. All school children need to be educated about disabilities. After all, statistically, 13% of their schoolmates have a disability. And we know formal education will promote self-awareness and self-pride for disabled students. Moreover, it promotes community inclusion and tolerance, inclusion in the workplace, and will impact the high rates of recidivism with 66% of inmates in Florida shown to have disabilities. But most importantly, this bill supports Florida families and Florida's economy. I was 31 years old when I had my first child, a boy with autism. This diagnosis was emotionally devastating. I couldn't understand it. I didn't know where to turn. My husband and I didn't know anything about autism. And in the end, ignorance, fear, shame, isolation destroyed my marriage. I'm happily remarried now, but I wonder, how would things have been different for Dylan and us if his father and I had both had some knowledge of disabilities rather than the on-the-job training course that we were on? In the end, we didn't make it. 22% of parents of children with disabilities don't. But today, with this legislation, we can begin to make a change through education. Here's Patricia to tell you more.
Thank you, Calibra. I too am a mom of 2 boys, one Grayson that's right here with me, who is diagnosed with autism and attends public school in Central Florida. The statistics surrounding the prevalence of disabilities in our state, our country, and our world fully support the need for disability awareness in our educational curriculum. The World Health Organization states that over 1 billion people are estimated to live with some form of disability, which corresponds to about 15% of the world's population, and this number continues to grow annually. Everyone will come in contact with someone with a disability at some point in their lives. We can choose to teach people, build their understanding, and give them the tools to know how to interact with individuals with disabilities, or we can let them wing it. What's happening in schools and on social media shows that we can't look away and let them wing it. Approximately 50% of adolescents with autism, speech impairments, and intellectual and learning disabilities are bullied at school, which is significantly higher than the rate of bullying faced by typically developing students, which is at about 10%. In the state of Florida, 14% of all students are special education students. Providing education and awareness around disabilities to these students, as well as the other 86% of students from a young age and throughout their continued education, is the first step towards building empathy, understanding, and acceptance. This will lead to increased inclusion in school, decreased bullying in person and on social media, stronger graduation rates, and in turn, stronger employment numbers. The UN stated that 78% of working age persons without disabilities are employed, compared to only 35% of those with disabilities. 2/3 of these unemployed respondents with disabilities said they would like to work, but were unable to find jobs because of their disability. How many of these missed opportunities were due to a lack of awareness by an employer on how to interact with and how to employ a person with a disability simply because they were never taught? By giving all students this education curriculum that we desperately need, we will in turn produce more viable, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens that can more positively contribute to their communities and find fulfilling employment. I will end by sharing that when my son Grayson has come in contact with someone who's not familiar with disabilities, approximately 75% of the time, they don't know how to react, how to interact with him, and how to communicate with him. These interactions have left him sad, hurt, and confused. How much better could these have gone if there was normalcy around his disability, simply because we had all grown up learning about it in school, were aware, and truly understood? Thank you for your time, and I will pass it over to Erica to share specifics around our proposal.
Thank you, Patricia. My name is Erica Vasquez, and I'm from Orange County in Orlando. This is my family. Like my other partners in this class, I am a mother. I have 3 children with their own unique needs. I was 22 years old when I gave birth to my first child, and 24 when I learned he had a disability. I had no idea how to handle my new reality, or so I thought. Denial turned into acceptance, acceptance turned into advocacy, advocacy turned into activism, and that is what led me here as an accepted candidate partner in training today, and currently pursuing a degree as an exceptional student education teacher. Although there is already a Florida statute for an optional Disability Awareness Week, we are proposing disability education be mandatory throughout all curriculum for all students in grades K through 12. School districts across the state need to provide instruction on the history of the Disability Acts, IDEA laws, iconic citizens that have a disability, and any other related topics. The school districts must also provide, from a science standpoint, meaningful curriculum as it relates to neurological, cognitive, and physical disabilities. The purpose of this proposal is to provide intensive instruction to expand students' knowledge, understanding, and awareness. The instruction must be implemented into existing school subjects and include the events and timelines of the development and evolution of services to and the civil rights of individuals with disabilities. Disability history must also include the contributions of specific individuals with disabilities, including including the contributions of acknowledged leaders, alike with intense science curriculum that teaches how an individual with a disability and a neurotypical brain differs and functions. Students can have their curriculum enhanced in English language arts and even elective classes. The goal of having the timeline of disabilities history curriculum is to create and foster better treatment for individuals with disabilities, especially for our youth in school, to increase attention to prevent bullying or harassment of students with a disability, encouraging individuals with a disability to develop increased self-esteem, resulting in gaining pride of being a person with a disability, obtaining post-secondary education, entering the workforce, and holding a valuable role in their communities, whereas reaffirming the commitment of full inclusion in society and equal opportunity for all persons with a disability, as it states in local and federal laws of the United States of America.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darlene Giol. I live in Broward County in Davie. My husband and I have been married for 16 years. We have a daughter who is 13 and a son who is 11. 3 years into becoming a mom, I had to become an advocate for my daughter, Grace. This is her here. She was diagnosed with autism, and if I'm being honest, we were devastated. We were scared, and we did not know what having autism meant for our child's life or for her future. We knew next to nothing about autism. The little bit we did know was vastly different than what we were experiencing with my daughter. but we would be thrown into a world of hands-on education, having never learned anything about this neurological disorder, nor ever knowing much about children with disabilities. I would discover throughout our journey that we were not alone in our lack of knowledge. When she was just 2, I had a lot of concerns. I reached out for help from our pediatrician, but he did not see any issues. I would discover later that he had no real education in autism. Professionals that came to evaluate her for services assured me she was fine because she was verbal and had a lot of words. But she was not fine, and once again, they did not know enough about autism to identify her challenges. Their lack of knowledge cost us free services and the early intervention we did not even know we would so desperately need down the line. When you have a child with a disability, it can be a very lonely journey for them and your entire family. We have kept to ourselves a lot, and it can be difficult to find supportive friends. People that I have thought were our friends have not been able to handle our family's challenges. Friendships have ended and have always been hard to come by for our daughter as well as for us as a family. So many people we meet have had no experience or education on disabilities of any kind. Families like ours suffer from loneliness because of this. I remember meeting Temple Grandin when my daughter was still little and being so excited to see how capable she was. I could not believe I'd never heard about her. I thought about how much more my daughter would have been accepted, understood, and included if we were all educated about people like Temple and her. We would have been better prepared as parents. It would have made my daughter more confident. My husband and I were never educated on the history of the disability movement as kids. Maybe knowing more about it would have informed me of our daughter's rights or prepared me for how hard we would have to fight to get services for her. Maybe I would not have to provide a daily education to others or become a research expert if everyone learned about this important part of our history. Maybe having hope and seeing representation would have saved me many tears, sleepless nights, severe anxiety, and the extreme stress a special needs parent endures. This last year has been our hardest yet, and it became very evident that there are so many more things to learn about autism and having an autistic teenage daughter. So many more things that I wish I had been educated about early on that would have supported us during such an extremely difficult time. I know that if we had known better, we could have done even better. I know that our community being educated would have had a positive and profound impact on our daughter's life and an impact on our family's life. It could have given us a more supportive circle. We would not have had to be so alone and isolated. This knowledge would have connected us all more as humans too. Then children like my daughter would live in a world where having a disability would not separate, segregate, or isolate them. They would be different, but never less. They would live in an inclusive world that sees them as the equals they are. When we know better, we do better, and we need to do much better. Now here's Dawn to share her story.
Thank you, Darlene. My name is Dawn Williamson from Citrus County. I'm a mom and advocate for my 13-year-old son who's on the autism spectrum. When my husband and I were in our 40s, we were aspiring parents that couldn't wait to begin our family through adoption. We knew very little about people with disabilities, and I confess, we didn't plan to adopt a baby with a disability because we didn't think we were qualified. In 2007, we matched for adoption. Days before my son's birth, we learned he had a biological brother who at the time was said to have severe autism, a term we hadn't heard before, so we began researching to find answers to our questions. I had difficulty finding accurate and consistent information about what autism was and how one became autistic, but his future didn't sound promising, and this was just 13 years ago. After learning our son did in fact have autism, our initiation into parenthood quickly became lonely and demanding, both physically and mentally, as our family and friends disconnected. Sadly, this is when we finally began to learn about people with disabilities and the iniquities they face daily. Like Darlene, we hadn't learned about the history of disability rights, nor did our family talk about people with disabilities because of the stigma. I did have a distant cousin with an intellectual disability. He often seemed angry, aggressive, and sometimes a little handsy, but my family simply said he wasn't all there. But I recall being afraid and not wanting to be around him. Looking back with new knowledge, I realized he wasn't scary. He was struggling to express himself functionally to have his needs met. Before our son was a year old, we noticed several autistic traits. At 18 months, he qualified for the Early Steps program and was nonverbal till he was almost 5 years old. I can attest that early intervention is vital for our kids on the spectrum and their families. We learned several techniques and strategies we still use today. However, when the program ended, things quickly changed for the worse. In VPK 3, the staff couldn't communicate with my son and barely met his basic needs like toileting and feeding. Sadly, this caused a high frequency of daily meltdowns and aggression, and this was just the beginning of what we would endure for several years to come due to people's lack of knowledge about how to work with people with disabilities. My son also has global apraxia, another neurological disorder that affects everything from talking to motor planning simple tasks. He was often frustrated wanting to do activities others were doing but couldn't get his body and words to comply. This led to him being teased by peers because of his different abilities. Interactions with educators were often strained because they set extremely low expectations and bored him with low-level curriculum. I wonder if people, including myself, had learned more about the history of disability rights and learned what people with disabilities had to endure because of ignorance and intolerance, would have changed our perception to one that promotes inclusion, kindness, and compassion. This is within everyone's ability. We are all more alike than we are different. Now, Kalisha will share why making this bill is so important to all of us. Thank you.
My name is Kalisha Batiste. I am the mother of Michael Batiste, who is living with autism. Like my colleagues, my child serves as my inspiration to advocate for individuals living with disabilities. As my colleagues have shared, they and I alike were activated into activism due to events that have taken us on a journey filled with diverse experiences. On this road, we have experienced joy, laughter, and yes, even breakdowns and tears as we fight for a better future for our children. Like my colleague Caliber, my marriage often has the additional strain of making difficult decisions on what is best for our son who is living with so many disabilities. These challenges can take their toll on marriages, but I cannot help but wonder if my husband and I had been taught about disabilities, how much easier our role as a parent of a child with a disability would be. And this is the main reason we are here today. Our request is simple. We ask that you join us by forming a bill that has the power to transform lives for the betterment of the citizens of Florida. We ask you to join us in making our great state one of the leaders on the forefront of disability awareness. My colleagues and I are parents who were not taught about people with disabilities, but were compelled to learn only once we had a child who was diagnosed with a disability. We are here today to tell you that this sink or swim approach does not work. My colleague Patricia has shared with you some alarming statistics showing that more people are diagnosed with some type of disability than in previous years. If the current statistical trend continues, there will be an increase in families like us who will be in a position of caretaker or support for loved ones diagnosed with a disability. For this reason, we must act now. The impetus of our message is that you do not want families to have to wait until they have a formal diagnosis before learning about persons with disabilities. We can assure you this bill has the power to improve individual communities as well as the entire state of Florida. Looking at recent events in Washington, D.C., when the nation's capital was under siege, Congresswoman Pelosi stated her young staffers knew to barricade the door, turn out the lights, and be silent because they learned it in school drills. If a tornado were to occur right now, most of us would know what to do because of what we learned in school. We realize that schools often are the vehicle for teaching life skills not learned at home. But we still stand before you today asking that you enact this much needed bill to update our Florida school curriculum. Together, as legislators and citizens, we have the power to realize the vision of what our children today will be like as parents, friends, neighbors, and citizens of tomorrow. I leave you with a quote from the great late Christopher Reeve. So many of our dreams at first seem impossible, then they seem improbable, and then when we summon the will, they soon become inevitable. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you on this bill.